Elias gripped the cold, jagged stone of the cliff edge, his knuckles white against the gray granite. Beside him, Tom leaned forward, shielding his eyes against the salt spray, while Maliki stood motionless, staring down at the churning black water. Below them, a crate splintered against the rocks. The sea surged, pulling the last of their remaining supplies into the depths with a hollow, crushing sound. None of them spoke. The wind roared, whipping across the plateau and forcing them to brace their legs against the shifting shale. Tom reached out, his hand hovering over the empty space where the gear had been just seconds before. The air tasted of brine and impending storm. Elias shifted his weight, his boots sliding on the slick, moss-covered ground, and looked toward the narrow ridge ahead. The path they had used to climb was gone, obliterated by the gale. The ocean continued its rhythmic, relentless assault on the base of the cliff. They were 3 men alone, tethered to the edge of a world that was rapidly shrinking. Maliki turned his head, his gaze sweeping the horizon. But there was nothing to see except the gray expanse of the churning water. The reality of their position set in with the cold. They had nowhere to go. Maliki pulled his gaze from the water and gestured toward the inland ridge. He turned and began to pick his way across the broken terrain, his boots crunching against loose pebbles. Elias and Tom followed, keeping low as the wind pushed against their backs. Maliki reached the narrow gap between the high rock walls first. He stopped abruptly, his hand pressing against the granite face. He moved forward, stepping over a pile of fresh, jagged debris that spilled from the heights above. He kicked at a boulder, but it did not budge. The path was not merely obscured, it was buried under tons of shattered stone. He climbed over the first tier of the slide, reaching for a handhold, but the rock groaned and shifted under his weight. He jumped back just as a smaller stone tumbled down, clattering into the darkness of the ravine. Maliki looked up, his jaw set, and shook his head as Elias and Tom caught up. They stood in a row, staring at the wall of rubble that now sealed the only exit. The path back to the village had been erased. Elias ran his hand over the rough surface of the slide, feeling the cold, immovable weight of the mountainside. The reality settled over them. The mountain had closed its gates. The temperature plummeted as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. The wind stopped howling and began to bite, a sharp, invisible force that cut through layers of fabric and settled into the marrow. Tom's teeth began to chatter, a rhythmic, violent sound that echoed against the stone wall. He wrapped his arms around his chest, but his fingers remained stiff, unable to grip his own shoulders. He stumbled, his knees buckling until he sank into the wet scree. Elias stepped forward, grabbing Tom by the arm to haul him upright, but the man felt heavy, his muscles locking up in the freezing air. Maliki knelt beside them, his own movements sluggish and uncoordinated. He rubbed his palms together, the skin raw and cracked, but there was no heat left in his touch. The cold was not just an obstacle anymore. It was a predator. Staying here meant becoming part of the mountain. Elias looked at the rock fall, then back at the exposed plateau where the wind gathered its strength. He shoved his shoulder into Tom's side, forcing him to stand. They could not linger. Every second of stillness was a surrender. Maliki stood, bracing himself against the wind, his eyes scanning the horizon for any break in the storm. They had to move, even if the path forward was blind. Elias reached into the depths of his pocket, his knuckles white and stiff. He pulled out a worn, leather-bound volume, the cover damp from the relentless spray of the gale. He held it close to his chest, using his body as a windbreak to protect the pages from the moisture. Tom and Maliki turned toward him, their movements slow and heavy, watching as Elias's thumb caught the edge of the paper. He pried the book open. The ink was faded, yet the lines remained distinct. He traced the damp, textured surface of the parchment with a trembling finger, his eyes darting across the faded script. The roar of the wind continued, but Elias did not look up. He stopped shivering, his focus narrowing entirely to the weight of the book in his palms. He turned a page, the sound of the dry paper snapping against the howl of the storm. He looked at the others, his expression hardened, and tapped the center of the page. The frantic energy of their earlier panic began to recede, replaced by a singular, focused silence. He stood his ground, the book acting as a physical anchor against the chaos of the mountain. He stood ready, waiting for the moment to speak. Elias snapped the book shut and shoved it back into his pocket. He turned, his arm extending to point toward the sheer vertical rise of the cliff face above the rockfall. The stone was slick, vertical, and offered almost no visible holds. Maliki shook his head, his hands held up in a sharp, dismissive motion. He gestured back toward the blocked path, his mouth moving in a silent protest against the impossible climb. Tom stood behind them, his back pressed against the granite, his breath coming in short, ragged hitches that shook his entire frame. He looked at the cliff, then down at the churning sea, his eyes wide and unfocused. Elias did not waver. He stepped into the center of the trio, grabbed Maliki by the shoulder, and pointed again at the narrow, jagged crevices near the summit. He moved with a sudden, sharp authority that cut through the hesitation. Maliki looked at the stone, then at Elias, his features tightening into a grim line of acceptance. Tom let out a long, shuddering exhale and pushed himself off the wall. There was no other way. The decision settled over them like lead. They turned toward the rock face, their eyes tracing the route upward, preparing for the gravity of the task ahead. Elias stepped forward first, his palms meeting the cold, abrasive granite. He pressed hard, feeling the bite of the rough stone against his skin. He searched for a crevice, found a narrow indentation, and curled his fingers into the rock. He pulled. His muscles tightened as he hauled his weight upward, his boots scraping against the wall until they found a sliver of leverage. Tom followed, reaching out with trembling arms. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the surface before he finally made contact. He gripped the stone, his knuckles straining as he tested his hold. Maliki moved last, shifting his center of gravity to mirror the others. He pressed his chest against the cliff, his eyes locked on the narrow cracks ahead. The wind whipped around them, pulling at their bodies, but they remained fixed to the surface. Elias shifted his right foot to a higher ledge, his balance flickering for a heartbeat before he settled. The stone was unforgiving, damp from the spray, and demanded total concentration. They moved in a synchronized, rhythmic effort, each pull and step a calculated struggle against the vertical drop. The sea roared far below, a constant reminder of the distance they had yet to conquer. They hung there, suspended between the abyss and the summit, the full weight of the climb settling into their shoulders. The rhythm held for 20 feet. Elias reached up, his fingers finding a solid notch in the granite. He pulled, shifting his weight upward. Maliki followed, his breath heavy in the thin air. He reached for a ledge that looked secure, but his boot landed on a patch of emerald green moss. The surface was slick as oil. His foot skidded outward, finding no purchase. Maliki lunged for the rock, his fingernails clawing at the stone, but he lost his footing entirely. A shower of loose pebbles and grit broke free from under his heel. The sound was sharp, a sudden clatter that echoed against the cliff face before fading into the roar of the sea below. Maliki swung, his body dangling by his right hand, his left leg kicking at the empty air. Tom froze, his eyes locked on the spot where the stones had vanished into the abyss. He did not move. He did not speak. The silence that followed the clatter was heavier than the wind. Elias pressed his forehead against the damp, cold stone, his grip tightening until his knuckles turned white. They stayed there, suspended and motionless, waiting for the vibration in the rock to stop. The danger had shifted from potential to immediate. Maliki pulled his leg back onto the rock, his breathing ragged. Elias did not look down. He knew that if he let the fear settle, none of them would move again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather-bound book. The pages were damp, curling at the corners from the sea spray, but the ink remained legible. He held it open with one hand, his thumb pressing against the binding. He began to speak. His voice was thin against the roar of the wind, yet it held a steady, rhythmic cadence that forced the others to listen. "The light finds the stone even when the tide rises," he recited, the words sharp and deliberate. He paused, waiting for the wind to drop, then continued. "Strength is not the absence of the abyss, but the choice to look upward." Tom shifted his weight, his eyes lifting from the dark spray below to meet Elias's gaze. The cadence of the words acted like a tether, pulling their focus away from the lethal drop. Maliki nodded, his grip on the granite firming up. The panic receded, replaced by the mechanical necessity of the next hold. Elias tucked the book away, his fingers finding a new crevice. They moved again, the rhythm restored, their progress slow but deliberate against the vertical wall. The granite wall finally relented, giving way to a narrow shelf of stone no wider than a man's shoulders. Elias stepped onto the ledge first, his boots scraping against the grit. He reached back, pulling Maliki into the space behind him. Tom followed, his movements stiff and uncoordinated. The ledge offered a temporary reprieve from the vertical climb, but it hung suspended over the churning sea. Tom stopped. He did not turn to face the wall. Instead, he leaned out, his gaze drawn downward by the rhythmic, thunderous impact of the waves against the base of the cliff. The sheer scale of the drop hit him all at once. His breath hitched, turning into a shallow, ragged gasp. He gripped the edge of the rock, his knuckles whitening, his body pressing flat against the stone as if trying to merge with it. His eyes dilated, fixed on the spray rising hundreds of feet below. He stopped responding to the wind or the cold. He was entirely consumed by the void. Maliki pressed his back against the wall to make room, glancing at Tom with widening eyes. The silence between them grew heavy, punctuated only by the relentless roar of the water beneath their feet. They were no longer climbing, they were simply trapped. Elias saw the moment Tom lost his footing in his own mind. He did not waste breath on soft words. He stepped into the gap, his shoulder bumping firmly against Tom's to break the line of sight toward the abyss. "Look at the rock," Elias commanded, his voice devoid of doubt. He reached out and wrapped his hand around Tom's wrist, guiding it upward to a jagged protrusion just above eye level. "Feel the stone, not the drop." "The stone." Tom blinked, his eyes darting from the void to Elias's steady, focused expression. The physical pressure of Elias's grip acted as an anchor, forcing the panic to recede. Elias kept his hand there until Tom's fingers tightened around the granite. "Move your left boot," Elias directed, watching the muscles in Tom's leg tense as he obeyed. Maliki watched from the side, his own stance loosening as the static tension broke. They were not out of danger, but the paralysis had shattered. Tom pulled his weight forward, his eyes locked onto the wall. Elias stepped back to allow him space, his own posture relaxed but ready. They moved as one again, the silence of the ledge replaced by the rhythmic scrape of boots against the cliff face. The sky turned the color of bruised iron. A sudden, sharp drop in temperature signaled the arrival of the gale. Before they could find better footing, the wind slammed into the cliff face, carrying a freezing mist that turned the granite slick with moisture. Visibility collapsed. The world narrowed to the few inches of stone directly in front of their faces. Elias pressed his chest flat against the wall, his fingers digging into a wet crevice. Beside him, Maliki shouted something, but the wind tore the words away before they could land. The rock beneath their boots began to weep, water trickling into the cracks and turning the once solid holds into treacherous, oily surfaces. Every movement became a gamble. Tom reached for a handhold, but his fingers slid off the mossy surface, his palms scraping raw against the sharp stone. He gasped, his body swaying outward as the mountain seemed to shiver, the vibration running through the granite and into their bones. They were no longer just climbing, they were fighting the mountain itself. The wind howled, pushing them away from the face, demanding they let go. Elias braced his legs, his muscles burning as he fought to keep his grip, waiting for the gust to break. The wall ended. Above them, a massive granite overhang jutted out like a stone wave, blocking the upward path. Elias pressed his forehead against the cold, wet rock, his lungs heaving. There was no way around. To continue, they had to climb the underside of the bulge, hanging by their fingers over the void. Maliki checked the hold above, his knuckles white as he tested the weight. "No lateral options," he grunted, the sound barely audible over the wind. Elias looked at the gap. The rock was smooth, devoid of meaningful texture, save for a few hairline fissures. Every muscle in his forearms was screaming, vibrating with the effort of holding his position against the gale. He looked at Tom, whose face was beaded with freezing rain, his jaw locked in a silent, desperate grit. They were at the absolute limit of their strength. One wrong move, one finger slipping from a damp edge, and the mountain would claim them. Elias reached up, his boots scraping for purchase on the near vertical slope. He pulled, his entire weight swinging out over the abyss, The granite groaned beneath his touch. He held his breath, waiting for the stone to snap. His fingers locked onto the sharp, unforgiving lip of the overhang. Elias committed his weight to the reach. His right hand locked onto a solid protrusion, but his left hand slid across a hidden, razor-sharp granite seam. The stone sliced deep. A jolt of white-hot pain shot up his forearm, forcing a reflexive, violent spasm. His fingers lost their purchase instantly. He jerked downward, his body swinging violently as he lost his footing on the slick moss. The scream died in his throat, replaced by the rush of wind as he plummeted 3 feet before his right arm locked straight, snapping taut against the shoulder socket. He dangled. The world narrowed to the single point of contact where his fingers dug into the wet, unforgiving stone. Below him, the abyss yawned, a dark, churning void of shadow and mist. He felt the warm wetness of blood running from his left hand, slicking his skin. It dripped, falling away into the darkness, disappearing before it could hit the rocks below. His breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. Every muscle in his right arm began to tremble under the sudden, dead weight of his body. He hung, suspended, the granite biting into his palm, his legs kicking uselessly against the empty air. Tom saw the slip. He did not hesitate. He lunged forward across the narrow ledge, his boots sliding on the wet, loose scree. He slammed his chest against the granite, reaching blindly into the void. His fingers brushed against Elias's forearm, then clamped hard around the wrist. The impact jarred them both, sending a fresh shower of pebbles cascading into the dark. Tom grunted, the sound forced from his diaphragm as he braced his feet against a jagged protrusion. He pulled. Elias's body swung inward, his boots scraping against the vertical wall, but the rock beneath Tom's knees groaned. A hairline fracture spiderwebbed outward from where Tom had wedged his weight. Elias looked up, his face pale. Eyes locked onto Tom's strained features. Every inch of movement was a gamble against the mountain. Tom's muscles bunched and corded, the effort of holding their combined weight vibrating through his frame. The stone beneath them crumbled, a handful of debris falling away into the abyss. They were locked in a stalemate against gravity, hanging in the narrow space between the mountain and the fall, both men breathing hard, neither able to move without risking a total collapse of the ledge. Maliki saw the fracture spreading. He did not call out. He shifted his weight, driving his knees into the wet moss, and dragged his body across the precarious gap above the two men. His breath was a sharp, ragged sound against the wind. He reached the upper ridge, his hands searching the granite surface until they found a deep, vertical fissure. He jammed his fingers into the crack, his knuckles turning white as he hauled himself upward. He did not stop to rest. He crawled over the edge, his boots finding a narrow, stable shelf just inches from the crumbling section. He stood, his thighs burning, and planted his feet wide to brace against the incline. He reached down, locking his hands around a protruding root and a solid stone spur. His muscles corded, screaming in protest as he took the strain. He became the anchor. He felt the weight of Elias and Tom shift against his hold, the vibration of their movement traveling through his arms into his shoulders. He gritted his teeth, his jaw locking, and pulled upward with every ounce of remaining strength. The rock groaned, then went still. He held them, his body a rigid bridge against the pull of the abyss. Maliki held the line, his frame trembling under the combined weight, but his resolve remained fixed. Elias and Tom did not wait. They surged upward, fingers clawing for purchase on the vertical face. Each movement was a calculated risk. Elias shoved his boot into a narrow gap, hoisting himself higher as the rock beneath his palms began to flake away. Beside him, Tom grunted, his lungs searing with every intake of thin, freezing air. They moved in rhythmic, jagged bursts, driven by the absolute necessity of escape. Suddenly, the holds beneath them shifted, sending a cascade of dust into their eyes. They did not pause to wipe it away. They lunged, fingers reaching for a sharp granite ridge 2 feet above their current reach. Skin tore against the abrasive surface, but they ignored the sting. They locked their fingers into the stone and hauled. The muscles in their backs and shoulders knotted and burned, reaching the absolute limit of their endurance. They scrambled, knees scraping, breath coming in shallow, frantic gasps. With a final, desperate heave, they cleared the overhang, their hands slapping onto the solid, unyielding surface of the upper ledge. They had beaten the cliff. Elias pulled his torso over the edge, his chest hitting the flat, cold surface of the plateau with a dull thud. He dragged his legs upward, his boots scraping against the gravel, and rolled onto his back. His chest heaved, each breath a jagged tear in his throat. Beside him, Tom hauled himself over the lip of the cliff, his movements slow and clumsy. He didn't stand. He simply slumped forward, his forehead resting against the dirt, his hands still curled in tight, white-knuckled fists. Maliki followed a second later, his strength finally spent. He stumbled as he cleared the edge, his knees buckling instantly as he hit the ground. The three of them lay in a loose, tangled heap, separated only by the distance of their own exhaustion. No one spoke. The wind still whipped across the open expanse, but the constant, lethal threat of the drop was gone. Elias closed his eyes. His fingers splayed against the grit of the plateau. He could feel the ground beneath him, solid and unmoving, a stark contrast to the shifting, treacherous rock face they had just conquered. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the synchronized, ragged sound of three men fighting to regulate their own heartbeats. The darkness began to thin, not with a sudden shift, but with a slow, creeping dilution of the shadows. Elias shifted his weight, his eyes tracking the eastern edge of the horizon. A sliver of pale, bruised purple light pierced the gloom, spreading upward to stain the low-hanging clouds. Beside him, the others remained still, their breathing finally beginning to sync with the steady, rhythmic movement of the wind. The purple deepened into shades of violet, then fractured into brilliant, sharp gold as the sun began its ascent. The light hit the plateau with sudden intensity, washing over the jagged rocks, and the three men huddled together. The harsh, biting cold of the long night seemed to retreat, pushed back by the warmth of the rising light. The clouds above caught the sun, glowing with an amber intensity that erased the last traces of the night's gloom. The horizon was no longer a wall of impenetrable shadow, but a clear, expansive line. The night of terror had been dismantled by the simple, persistent arrival of the morning. Every crevice of the plateau was now visible, stripped of the mystery that had once hidden the path of their escape. Elias pushed himself into a sitting position, his muscles twitching with fatigue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather-bound book. The cover was damp, the edges soft from the sea spray. He used his thumb to pry the pages apart, the paper sticking together in small, stubborn clumps. Tom and Maliki remained prone on the ground, their chests rising and falling in slow, heavy cycles. Elias cleared his throat, a sharp, grating sound in the morning quiet. He held the book with both hands, his knuckles white against the dark material. He found the passage he had memorized by the hearth. He looked up at the vast, clear expanse of the sky. His voice was raspy, thin, and brittle, but he did not falter as he began to speak. He recited the words, the sound of them carrying across the flat plateau. His lips moved with precision, every syllable deliberate. He did not look at the ground. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, his tone devoid of desperation, rooted instead in the steady, rhythmic cadence of the text. The air carried his voice away, leaving only the sound of his breath between the lines. Elias closed the book. The sound of the pages meeting was sharp in the stillness. He tucked the volume away and stood, his legs stiff, his boots finding traction on the sun-warmed stone. Tom and Maliki stirred, pushing themselves upright, their movements slow and heavy with the weight of the previous night. They stood together, a small group against the vast, golden expanse of the plateau. No one spoke. The memory of the cliff and the dark sea remained behind them, trapped in the shadows of the descent. Elias turned toward the horizon, his posture set. Tom and Maliki followed, falling into a steady, rhythmic pace. They walked side by side, their shadows stretching long and thin across the rocky terrain. The sunlight hit their faces, steady and bright, washing away the grit and the exhaustion of the climb. Each step took them further from the edge, further from the fear that had defined their night. They reached the plateau's boundary where the ground sloped gently down into the plains. They did not look back. They kept their eyes fixed on the line where the earth met the sky, moving forward into the light as the morning deepened around them.